Oh, good evening. We're here now, finally, going to do this study about lessons from David. We are into the power of God, as we remember last time, which has been a while ago. David took his stone and slung it and hit Goliath in the forehead. And he did this because he knew he had the covenant of God, covenant with God, and he had God's favor. The Philistine had no covenant with God, so he wasn't worried about him. He wasn't going to be able to do anything about what David was about to happen, about to throw at him. So we need to remember that we too have a covenant, the same covenant as David with God, and that everything we do with his blessing. And we're going to learn more about this here in the study this evening. I'm going to start with the scriptures as normal. And the first one is John chapter 6, verses 5 through 13. It says, when Jesus then lifted up his eyes and saw a great company come unto him, he saith unto Philip, whence shall we buy bread, that these may eat? And this he said to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 pennyworth of bread is not sufficient for them, and every one of them may take a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, saith unto him, there is a lad here which hath 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes. What are they among so many people? People is my word. And Jesus said, make the men sit down. Now there was much grass in the place. So the men sat down and number at about 5,000. Now we don't know for what reason that this is, but they always speak of just the men. They don't speak of how many women and children were with them. And we know that many men probably brought their families with them. So there's way more than 5,000 people here. So Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, distributed to the disciples, and the disciples to them that were set down, and likewise of the fishes, as much as they would. When they were filled, he said unto the disciples, gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. Therefore they gathered them together and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which remained over and above unto them that had eaten. So we definitely can see the power of God here with this parable of how he was able to feed. Well, it's not a parable, it was the truth, I guess. How he was able to feed way over 5,000 people with just 5 barley loaves and 2 fishes. This is definitely an illustration of the power of God. The next verse we have is 1 Samuel 17, 50 through 51. Would you like to read that?
So David prevailed over the Philistines with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine, and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, took his sword, drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled.
Sorry, I forgot my speaker, just in case you're having trouble hearing us. Microphone.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and read the next one.
Yes, please, present it.
2 Corinthians 9:8. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that ye, always having all sufficiency in all things, may abound to every good work.
So God was able to make all grace abound toward you, you and me, and everyone who is partaker of Jesus, so that we may have all sufficient things that may abound to every good work for us. That's how much God loves us. He's He's giving us all this. He gave it to us because Jesus died for us. And we have much power, the same as David did. He came up against a giant and slew him. He knew he was going to slew him. He knew that he would kill Goliath without a doubt in his heart or his thoughts. He knew that God was with him and that this was going to happen. Now we'll get into the lesson now. It says, the power of God. I don't always do things perfectly, yet God takes those things and makes them work. I do what I can, and God adds his power and anointing to it. Little is much when God is in it. The little boy only had 5 loaves and 2 fishes. It was barely enough for his lunch, let alone the multitude. Yet when he gave it to Jesus, it multiplied. It fed the multitude, and they had more left over after they were all full than when they began. John 6:5-13. That's what you do. You give God a little bit you have, and he takes it and multiplies it to abundantly meet the need. That's a good lesson for all of us. I'll read the next two.
I believe that's what happened to David. He may have been good or even average with his sling, but it wasn't his marksmanship. It was his trust in God. David went out there and slung that stone in faith. The Lord took it and made it hit the mark. Notice that the word says he slew him, but there was no sword in the hand of David.
1 Samuel 17:50b. So David came to a sword fight with a stone and ended up using the giant's own sword to cut his head off. So that was total faith. God was with David the whole way. So head held high. 1 Samuel 17:51. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. Which is a very interesting remark here, and I'm just going to get into that a little bit. So David didn't stop once Goliath was down. He got on top of him, took Goliath's own sword out, cut off his head, and then held it up for all to see. Once the Philistines saw that Goliath was dead, then they fled. So it's a note for all of us that we don't just stop part way. When we get into doing something for God, we have to go all out, go all the way to the end. Read.
Next one.
Yeah.
The Philistines didn't flee when they saw Goliath fall. They wondered if perhaps he was just wounded and could have gotten back into the fight. He still may have overcome and defeated David. Maybe they thought he just fell. Sometimes big people have trouble lifting their feet and even trip over them. The Philistines who were watching this weren't sure that Goliath was dead. But once David stood on top of him, took his own sword out, cut off his head, and held it up, nobody doubted anymore about whether Goliath would get up and fight again. This proved he was dead. Okay. David didn't just fight his enemy and knock him down. He completely conquered and totally vanquished him. David made sure there was no way Goliath would ever get up and fight again. And once he held that head up, that's when all the Philistines fled. That's when the deliverance came. That's when the Israelites began to chase the Philistines and win the battle. Many times we resist the devil and fight just enough to get some relief. We knock him down, but we don't knock him out. So he raises up and fights again another day. It's like chasing your enemy over the hill to where they're out of sight. Since you're out of immediate danger, you don't pursue them. You let them go. You allow them to regroup and come back to fight you again. David didn't do that. He didn't just knock his enemy down. David fought his enemy until they were destroyed. He was taking no prisoners. He was literally out to destroy the enemy.
We know that this is true, what Andrew's saying here, because when David stopped and picked up the stones from the riverbed, he didn't get just one stone. He picked up 5 because Goliath's younger brothers were in the Philistine army also behind him. So David wasn't just out to get Goliath. He was going to go after all the giants, not just the first one, but all 5 of them. But when he held up the head to the first one, they all ran. And I imagine being a giant, they probably outran the rest of the army. They probably were way out ahead of them. But David knew that he had to go through with this and do it all the way to the finish. Not just 1 or 2, but all 5 were going to go down. And that's what he had in his mind. So, subheading is Finish the Job. In 1991, the United States, Great Britain, and the coalition forces came against Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq. They had him on the ropes, but they backed down. Instead of just walking into Baghdad and finishing the job, they pulled out. There appears to be strong evidence suggesting that Iraq financed terrorists. So it's possible that if they had finished the job in 1991, there never would have been the terrorist attacks that happened on September 11th, 2001. These wouldn't have been airplanes, or there wouldn't have been airplanes crashing into the World Trade Center in the Pentagon. There wouldn't have been another airplane, one that seemed to be headed for the White House, crashing into a field. There wouldn't have been all this loss of life or the need for a second war with Iraq in 2003. But the United States and its allies got an objective accomplished and the immediate pressure relieved, and they humiliated Saddam Hussein and his people and thought that was enough. They didn't pursue their enemy until he was destroyed. Because of that, they had to come back 12 years later and do it again, costing lives, money, resources, world opinion, and a lot of other things that would have been unnecessary if they had just taken care of the first time. So don't just resist the devil until you get some relief. Fight him until his work is totally destroyed. If you have arthritis, don't just pray and say, well, it's decreased. I can live with that. No, fight that thing until there's not a trace of it left. Don't just sit there and say, well, I was in absolute poverty. I believed God and now we're okay. We aren't really getting along the way we should, and I certainly can't give the way I would like to, but we're okay. I think I'll just settle here. No, that's not the right attitude. You need to fight poverty until you destroy it. Keep believing God until you come out on top and truly abound, so much that you can give unto every good work, like it says in 2 Corinthians 9:8. Don't settle with just enough for you. Pursue the main manifestation of prosperity to the point that you can become a blessing to other people. You need to pursue the blessing of God and defeat your enemy until he cannot rise again. You need to get the attitude that you are taking no prisoners and giving no quarter. You are going to fight the devil and destroy him. You need to get this attitude. You want to read some?
Yeah. Fight now or fight later. Once you cut the head off that problem you're fighting and hold it up for all to see, all the other demons will begin to flee. When the Philistines saw David hold up the head of their champion, they fled. But they didn't flee until they were certain he wasn't going to get back up again. Once the enemy sees that you have this attitude that you're going to totally vanquish him from your life, that's when he and all of the other demons will flee. The only reason the devil fights us so hard is because he's a coward. He knows that if he doesn't fight you now, he'll have to fight you later. So he'll fight if you so he'll fight you if he thinks he can get you to back down and cower before him. But once he sees that you're going to take it
Take it to him.
But once you see that you're going to take it to him, he just tucks his tail and runs. David didn't overcome Goliath because of anything natural. It wasn't his talent.